everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got an epic show ahead, but just remember, if any of you have experiences you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. You can either email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com or head over to paranormalportal.net. Scroll down and find the button that says Interview Me, and that'll allow you to look at a calendar of possible times and dates and find a date that works for you. Love to hear your stories, so definitely get in touch with me. We've got a phenomenal guest joining us today, and this gentleman and I met on a couple different shows over the years, and just a fantastic guy and incredibly knowledgeable and insightful. And he is here to talk about the Mothman Phenomena. Of course, I'm speaking of Travis Shortt, who is the writer, producer, and host of the first feature-length documentary on Mothman, which is called Darkwings, The Mothman Chronicle. And you can check out more about that on his Facebook page, Darkwings, The Mothman Chronicles. So without further ado, let's dive into this and find out just what is this Mothman. Hey, Travis, welcome to the show, brother. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, man, it is great to be with you. Like you said, you know, we've crossed paths many times on multiple shows, being guests and things like that. It's a pleasure to be a guest on your show. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, brother. Because, you know, the thing is and people like thank me. And it's like, you guys bring the value. You guys bring the experience. You know, you get the guests on the show are the ones that make these shows incredible. But all the same, yeah, I've absolutely been fascinated listening to you in the past. And I was like, man, he's got to come on the show because, of course, of all the phenomena out there, the Mothman is probably one of the most, hard to nail down. It seems like a lot of people think it's a lot of things, and it's hard to understand just what we're dealing with here. But I got to ask you, where did this journey start for you?
Oh, wow. Loaded question. Let me see if I can unpack all of that and answer it. So you're right. First of all, Mothman is a very, very interesting topic in the world of the paranormal because it kind of falls into the cryptid circles. It falls into the UFO circles. It falls into the trash bin of the unexplained. It's all it's a lot of things. I mean,
and spiritual, yeah.
Yeah, it was the spiritual, the religious, the Native American. There's all of these ties to Mothman. Honestly, the journey for me began with Mothman in 2001. I think I have the date right. No one's asked me about this in a long time. At the time, I was the managing partner of an advertising agency in Virginia, but we had an office in Las Vegas. So we had a Virginia office and a Las Vegas office, and so I was bouncing back and forth between the two, as was my business partner, Charlie McCracken. And when we were in Vegas, our thing was we would always, everybody's like, "Ooh, Vegas, yeah. Vegas is great for about 48 hours, and then you want to get the hell out of Vegas because it's like overkill. It's like sensory overload. I got to." So we would drive, and we would take our rental car and we would drive into the desert, and we would find ghost towns and just abandoned locations or just the desert. And one of the trips that we took, we drove north out of Las Vegas, and we ended up in Rachel, Nevada. And Rachel, of course, is home to Area 51. And there was this little roadside attraction called the Area 51 Research Center. And I don't want any of the listeners to be dissuaded or persuaded in any particular direction by that. It was literally a Silver Eagle 1950s trailer camper that was also had books and items for sale and things like that. Well, while we were there, we actually picked up a book by Jerome Clark, and it dealt with different stories. It was like 365 stories across the country. So there was like a weird story for every day of the year. And one of the stories was about Mothman in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And we were driving back from Rachel, Nevada to Las Vegas. I was driving. Charlie was in the passenger seat. And we were, he was going through all the stories. And he got to Mothman, and he started reading it while I was driving. And it started intriguing me and him because, of course, we were situated in the southwestern portion of the state of Virginia, which bumps up to Virginia, Kentucky, North Carolina, Tennessee. We're in that little section.
Oh, sure.
And so we're like, well, how far is Point Pleasant from where we live? And he started looking at the map. And he's like, well, it's about 3 hours. So we made this mental note. This was like 2001. We made this mental note. Well, if we ever get the chance, we're going to go and look at it. Well, in 2003, we were shooting a promotional film for a small college in Kentucky, and we ended up there. And we were, at that point, about 80 miles from Point Pleasant. So we finished the shoot, and we got in the car, and our typical thing to do was to stop at, roadside attractions, convenience stores, things like that. We got some snacks and got a map, and we decided, well, screw it. We're already here. We'll just take the rest of the day. We both were married at the time. We called our wives and said, look, we'll be back tomorrow. We're going to Point Pleasant. And, of course, the question was, what the hell is in Point Pleasant? It's like, well, nothing that we know of, but, we're going. So we drove to Point Pleasant, spent the night, and that was the beginning. This was February, March 2003. And we just fell in love with the town and the people, and we made some great connections. And we started talking, and the more we talked, the more we uncovered, and the more we're like, there's a story here, not just the Mothman, but there's a story about the people and everything. And what we tried to do with the documentary was to show the humanity of the film and also the supernatural and the paranormal. And so it started in 2003. We completed the film in late 2008, early 2009, and then we premiered it at the Mothman Festival in September of 2009. And so that, for me, that was the beginning of the journey.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, the craziness of it is that most commonly people seem to regard this as some kind of harbinger, as it preceded the bridge collapse in Point Pleasant. And I've heard reports of this creature being sighted by the Twin Towers in New York prior to the attacks, by the bridge in Minneapolis before that collapse, and even in Chernobyl. Have you heard of all these other events such as this? Yes, that was the West Virginia story was kind of the genesis of the Mothman Chronicle, which was the title. There was always supposed to be multiple stories that came after. As I was telling you before we got on the air, Charlie McCracken unfortunately died in 2019. Matthew Fleming, who was the other producer and researcher on the project, he and I met yesterday for a round of golf, and we were talking about actually resurrecting the story and kind of moving forward from fantastic. Yeah.
Yes, the Chernobyl, absolutely. Have a photograph of the supposed winged entity at the Twin Towers before the collapse on 9/11. The bridge in Minneapolis, yes. We followed all of those.
Okay.
And of course, I'm good friends with Lon Strickler, who is following this wave of sightings of winged humanoids in the Chicago area.
Right.
So, that's been going on for close to 2 decades now.
Wow.
And there's this, you're right, there is this one side of things that says this entity is a harbinger of doom, and it's there to forewarn about all of these things. There's those that say that it's there to cause these horrible disasters.
Oh, sure.
And we went into the documentary. It was really funny because there were 3 of us that were working on it. Charlie went in totally skeptical and objective, having absolutely no concept Matthew Fleming went in. He's had been an environmental science major in college. He went in thinking mutation from the TNT area there in Point Pleasant, all the chemicals that had been dumped. I went in with my background being religious and having been a minister and ordained and all of that. I went in with this kind of spiritual concept, and all of us went in with these kind of different ideas. We started it's been 20 years now. My perception, my perspective has changed a great deal over the years, the more that I have learned and the more I've watched about these sightings. But the original sighting in Point Pleasant in 66, 67, those were very interesting and very, very distinct. And there were a lot of things, whether they were coincidental or whether they were tied to it, like you said, the collapse of the bridge. All of those things make you kind of look at this through a different lens, a different perspective.
Sure. Yeah, it is. It's such a tough phenomena to nail down, and including even in of course I've been following Lon's reporting out of the Chicago, Illinois, O'Hare area, and others that didn't appear in Lon's research, or maybe I didn't bump into them there, but the other thing that I've noticed is there seems to be quite maybe, I don't want to say disparity, but maybe quite a range of physical characteristics that are described. Like some people have witnessed these things, being large humanoid-like beings with the red glowing eyes. That seems pretty consistent for the most part. There's I've run into stories where they're smaller, but some of them show the wings beating, and others say no, they were just stationary and it just kind of lifted off as if it was more extraterrestrial or technological. And so what do you make of that? Is that just a witness variations, just how they appreciated or experienced it? Or do you think that there is maybe a larger catalog of what we're describing as Mothman, but it's just kind of a blanket term?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that really hadn't been talked about until several years ago. One of the things that I actually proposed, because I was the keynote speaker for about 5 years at the Mothman Festival in Point Pleasant. It takes place every September.
Oh, cool.
And they always had me speak, and they had me speak about the spiritual/religious aspects of Mothman because of my background. And I was actually one of the first people to posit that the eyewitness accounts, between 66 and 67, there were over 100 eyewitness accounts across multiple counties in West Virginia. Mm-hmm. Some of them happening simultaneously. Same time, they were coming into the police, and they were reporting the same entity, a winged entity, but there were variations in the description. Anywhere from 6 to 9 feet, winged, red eyes. Some saw clothes, some didn't. Some saw gray, some saw black, some saw Linda Scarberry, one of the first eyewitnesses, saw the original Mothman was ashen in color. Those are her direct quotes, that he was ashen in color, tall, muscular, winged, with wings like an angel, and glowing red eyes. That was her actual description to the police. Mm-hmm. So what I posited is that individuals were not seeing one entity in West Virginia. They were seeing multiple entities. They were seeing the same type of entity, but not the same quote-unquote Mothman. And I hate the term Mothman. I come out of media just like you do. And the AP is the one that latched on and termed the phrase Mothman. There's nothing insect-like, there's nothing moth-like about the descriptions that came forth. It was always described as a humanoid, so someone that was human, mm-hmm. wings, either angel-like or bat-like, and red glowing eyes. Those were always the common descriptors of this entity. Nothing moth-like. the statue in Point Pleasant is probably the closest to an actual depiction of what people saw.
Oh, okay.
So I think what was happening is that there were, in Point Pleasant anyway, between 66 and 67, I think there were multiple sightings of this group of winged entities. Now, some people call them angels, some call them demons. And I went in with a spiritual perspective. I went in looking at it from the lens of, divinity, and having been a pastor and ordained minister in the Southern Baptist denomination, and I went in with that perspective. And I think there's some credence to that. I think when we look at some of the things that happened, that you can definitely make the claim that was what was going on. 20 years later, looking at all of these other sightings and what people are seeing, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think what's happening is people are seeing an entity or entities that have wings. They may come from a different dimension. They may come from a different planet. They may come from a different time. I'm not exactly sure.
Sure.
But those things are occurring. And the interesting thing is, it happened in 66 and 67. There were sightings of Vietnam. There, as you mentioned, Chernobyl, World Trade Center, all of that. And then there was kind of this lull, and nobody saw them. And then all of a sudden, they're being seen again. And they're being seen in the Great Lakes area of Chicago. Lon Strickler has cataloged over, hundreds of sightings in the past decade that have been in that area. Does that mean something bad's about to happen? Possibly.
Sure.
I'm not going to go on record as saying that.
Right.
Just, it's possible. It is a distinct possibility. One of the things that we discovered about Point Pleasant was Point Pleasant seems to be, it was almost like this magnet for paranormal activity, because you had Mothman, there were UFO sightings, Men in Black, there were hauntings, there were different locations that had a lot of poltergeist activity. You had animal mutilations, you had supposed witchcraft and Satanism that was going on. There was just like this hotbed of all these things happening during the 60s and into the early 70s. It was like, well, maybe it was just one of those things that this is where, Mothman decided to show up because all this other stuff was happening.
That's really interesting. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, the bridge collapse was really, we got there and we started talking to people. And of course you had, there were people in the town that believed in the Mothman sightings. There were people that said, oh, and as a matter of fact, the very first trip that we took into Point Pleasant, I remember we crossed the bridge, we came into Point Pleasant, and we stopped at the visitor center. And we went in and we were talking to the girl behind the desk, and we're like, we're here, we're out of town, we want to, find out a little bit more about Mothman. And she laughed at us, and she's like, well, she goes, we don't deal with that here. She goes, but if you want to talk to the crazies, go down on Main Street. And she gave us a couple of businesses to go talk to on Main Street. Now this was like 2003, early 2003. And so we went to Main Street and talked to the crazies. We talked to Carolyn Harris of Harris's Steakhouse. We talked to Jeff Wamsley and some of the other people that had actual experiences. And what we discovered is that, yes, there was this event. It's kind of like Kecksburg, if you're familiar with Kecksburg and the UFO crash that supposedly happened there.
Sure. Yep.
60s. Sci-Fi Channel did this great town hall debate several years ago, and the town was totally divided. There were like some people that saw it and believed it, and there were some that didn't, and they denied it, and it was like totally divided. And that was the way Point Pleasant was 20-some years ago. What we discovered, though, was there was more to the story than the paranormal and the supernatural aspect. And what we really bought into and fell in love with was the people. And starting talking to the individuals who actually had encounters and had been affected negatively, mostly negatively, some positively, but most of them negatively. And so that's what we delved into with the documentary, was to explore the tenacity of human nature, how that something so bad can happen. Because when the bridge collapsed in '67, that bridge connected Point Pleasant, Point Pleasant, West Virginia with Gallipolis, Ohio. It was about a mile-long bridge.
Mm.
But when that bridge collapsed, you had to, if you were on either side, you had to drive 10 miles north to the next bridge, cross the bridge, drive 10 miles south to get to Gallipolis. So it was a 40-mile round trip if you wanted to do anything. Restaurant, shopping, anything like that. And that was the case for 10 years. It took 10 years for them to actually replace the Silver Bridge when it collapsed.
Oh, it did? Wow. Okay.
So economically, there was this huge impact on Point Pleasant because, and to this day, I went, my daughter turned 16 3 years ago. The only thing she wanted for her birthday was to go to Point Pleasant and retrace Dad's steps. And what he did was working on the documentary. So I took her and a bunch of her friends, and we took this weekend-long trip. Even today, the franchise development is on the Ohio side, not the West Virginia side. There's nothing in Point Pleasant. Wow. It's all mom-and-pop, locally owned. That's it. All of the franchise, all of the national chains, that's all on the Ohio side.
Mm-hmm. I did not know that.
Economically, Point Pleasant was impacted. From a psychological standpoint, they were horrifically impacted. The bridge collapsed. 47 people lost their lives when that bridge collapsed. 2 of those bodies were never found. Mm. And if you go to the River Museum there in Point Pleasant, almost every single state in the Union is represented by the bodies that fell into that water. On December 1967.
Wow. Yeah, what a horrible event.
Yeah, and it was one of those things, it was, at that time, in '67, it was one of the greatest tragedies to happen on American soil. And it actually spearheaded the Johnson administration to actually go in and start inspecting every bridge in this country to make sure that they were up to standard.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it was one of those things that, it was a paranormal, supernatural kind of event, but it had long-reaching practical impacts on the country and on the lives of those that were there in Point Pleasant.
Yeah, it's incredible that, something as simple as and it's not simple in a rudimentary sense, but just generally speaking, like, well, a bridge fell. Okay, we'll put up a new one. But the long-standing ramifications of that and how you've just outlined that it affected the status quo in Point Pleasant, but maybe it saved them from, becoming overrun by every McDonald's and chain restaurant and all the other garbage, whereas it's nice to have that one place that still is kind of old Eastern America,
Well, it is. It's a river town, kind of like New Orleans, like Charleston. Doesn't quite have the pompous air that New Orleans and Charleston has, but it's a river town.
Uh-huh.
But in Point Pleasant, there's one hotel, the Low Hotel, historic. It's 3-4 stories. Beautiful interior. We shot some of the documentary. We did some interviews at the Low.
Oh, okay.
But other than that, everything else is, like I said, I took my daughter 3 years ago. We went to I wish I could remember the pizza place. But they have a Mothman pizza.
Oh, nice.
I took my daughter and her friends there. We ate. But as far as staying, we were across the river in Gallipolis. And actually, when we were shooting the documentary, we always stayed at what at that time was the Blue Fountain Hotel, actually motel. It's been bought out now, but It's actually where John Keel stayed when he was writing the Mothman prophecies.
Okay.
It's a hotel that he stayed at. So, for accuracy and, just shits and giggles, and honestly, we would decided to stay there every time that we were in Point Pleasant. We would choose to stay there and then, drive across. And it's actually funny because we always debated about the pronunciation of Gallipolis because it's actually spelled Galliopolis.
Oh, okay. But it's
and
Gallipolis?
But it's pronounced Gallipolis.
Oh.
So we were actually in the town, and we stopped at this BP gas station one day, filling up with gas, and we'd been debating about how to pronounce it. Was it Galliopolis? Was it, whatever. And so we were filling up with gas, and we asked this old guy came out, typical. It was actually one of the few full-service gas stations that you would actually attend. Would clean the window, oil, all that stuff. And I'm like, sir, I said, can you help us out? We're having a debate. And he's like, sure. What can I do for you? I said, well, can you tell me how to pronounce where we are? And he looked at me. He said, BP.
He's like, oh man, these tourists. Oh, that's hilarious. Oh, funny.
True story. It's just like, okay, fair enough. Yeah, it's like,
yeah. Then you just quit. We'll just wait till people mention it. Yeah. What do you think? Do you think that you had mentioned the First Nations and such? So, by virtue of historical reference, this phenomena goes much beyond Point Pleasant, though, correct?
Yes. Winged entities, and I use the term entity. I don't like using the term cryptid because I don't think Mothman is a cryptid. I don't. There are cryptids. I believe that totally. I just don't think Mothman falls into that category. I don't like using the term monster. I don't, creature thing. It's an entity. My presentation when I would speak at the Mothman Festival was always about winged entities across cultures because they do exist. They exist in Christianity. They exist in Judaism. They exist in Islam. They exist in Mesoamerica. You have Quetzalcoatl, the winged serpent. You have in Hinduism. Every culture, every religion has the belief, the depiction of these winged entities that are always communicating with mankind, imparting knowledge, imparting wisdom, warning about impending doom, all of those things. So, I mean, it's one of those things. It is not just in Point Pleasant. It's not just in modern times. It crosses ages. It crosses cultures. It crosses religion. They're there, whether we want to recognize it or not, and recognize the commonality, but they are there.
Yeah, it's incredible. And the other thing that occurs to me, and I want your take on this too, because you're obviously someone that's looked into this quite a bit, but you hear stories of things like Bat Squatch and Owl Man, and you fill in the blank. There's so many winged quote unquote cryptids out there. Do you think that they're probably one and the same with these other things, or do you think that they're probably something different entirely?
No, I think they're one and the same. I think Nick Redfern, who is one of the leading experts in cryptozoology and writing about these things and UFOs and all things paranormal, as a matter of fact. And I've had him as a guest on shows that I've hosted or co-hosted. Read all of his books. He goes back as far as the early 1950s in Texas. There were sightings of winged humanoids, and actually, you can go back as far as England in the late 1800s. Spring-Heeled Jack, which was this individual that was, bounced, flew, had wings, into modern times. Like I said, in the 50s and the 60s, Vietnam. I mentioned that. And Redfern is the one that talks about these two U.S. officers who were in Vietnam who witnessed a female winged entity flying over them. Not a bat, not a cryptid. A female winged entity, totally naked, totally black, and not like African American, but like pitch black. The entity was totally devoid of color, and they saw this, and they watched it, and they reported it. These entities, they've been around for a long time. People have seen them. I think they're one and the same. I think they are, like you said, Bat Squatch, all of these entities that have these winged appearances. I think they're the same. I don't think they're the same entity. I think they're the same genre, if that makes sense.
Sure.
The same genus.
Right. And that would make sense to me, because I don't know. It boggles my imagination oftentimes that how much people see, how much they see, how much can be out there, how much could there be out there that we don't know. And while that number might be stunning, and probably is, that we're largely unaware of a lot of what's going on around us, it just makes me wonder, well, how many creatures, undocumented creatures, could there be really?
Well, and Keel even said that, and I had the distinct pleasure of interviewing John Keel twice during the documentary, and Keel was a recluse. He didn't talk to people. And it was through a mutual friend that I was able to get him to talk to me for the documentary. But even Keel said, when he started his investigation, and Mothman was not what brought Keel to West Virginia, it was UFO sightings.
Oh, okay.
What Keel to Point Pleasant. Mothman just kind of happened on his radar while he was there. Excuse me. What he was doing while he was there was, looking at all of these different aspects of supernatural and the paranormal, and his thing was that Mothman, in Keel's own words, was an ultra-terrestrial.
Okay.
It was an entity that existed outside of this realm, but that would sometimes make an appearance, and those individuals that were tuned into that frequency could see it, which would, in Keel's mind, explain why some people saw Mothman, some people didn't.
Sure. Okay.
And so that was always Keel's stance until the very end of when the very last interview I did with him. He had kind of changed his mind, and he was like, honestly, he's like, I don't know what Mothman was. He's like, it was something, people saw it. I don't know what it was. But early on, his theory was that it was an ultra-terrestrial. It was something that existed on the same plane in which our world exists, but operated at a higher frequency. So only those individuals that were in tune with that higher frequency could see this entity.
That makes sense. Certainly we talk about, through the course of my show, it's called the Paranormal Portal, but we do discuss portals sometimes, and, gateways and multi-dimensional experiences and such. And why not, I guess, if we can apparently fall into these things sometimes and be in a strange surroundings that nothing makes sense, and then suddenly we're back in the world we know. Well, then that's again, I think that demonstrates that there's a lot going on here that we just don't know. But one thing I've always been curious is some people, by and large, most of the descriptions of encounters with the Mothman, quote unquote Mothman, is pretty benign, but every once in a while you get those aggressive reports. Do you think that they sometimes act aggressively, or do you think that's just a misinterpretation of the events, or what is your take on that?
Well, I hate trying to project human logic and human emotion onto something that we don't even understand to begin with. And that's something that Lon and I have talked about when I've been on his show. People talk sometimes about, red eyes, yellow eyes, things like that when they see these winged entities. Humankind, if we think red eyes, we automatically think evil, demonic. Maybe he's just hungover. Maybe his eyes are just bloodshot. I mean, it's one of those things we want to project these things and try to make it make sense.
Sure.
And my thing was always, okay, so you've got an individual that sees a winged entity and they've got red eyes. Is it evil? Well, maybe not. Maybe that's just a way of differentiating where they come from, what realm they come from, what portal, as you mentioned, they come through. I think it's really hard to try to catalog these types of sightings, these types of appearances into our world, because we don't know where they're coming from. We don't know what they're. They may be looking at us, going, "Why are they all blonde and
where's their wings?
Where why don't they have wings? Why do these things? It's one of those. It's like we have to kind of take a step back and examine it, and we examine it through our lens, through our perspective. But we also have to go, well, but let's look at it from a different perspective. Maybe they're something that we don't even understand.
Yeah, we do have a tendency to anthropomorphize things and humanize them and attribute our own characteristics to them. And you're absolutely dead on. We just don't know anything. So that's probably actually detrimental, because I think if you're going to look at this with even through a feigned scientific lens, you've got to remove all assumption and just let the facts speak for themselves, or the events speak for themselves. And if you can derive a narrative from that, then great. But if you can't, you don't get to editorialize it, and that's not correct. And I think it causes a lot of confusion and misunderstanding in these fields as well. And it's pretty epidemic around the entire paranormal spectrum that we anthropomorphize. We're Bigfoot is this. No, it's this. No, it's this. The UFOs are this. They're invading. No, they're visiting. No, they're guardians. And we keep attributing because you said it great. Looking at it through our lens, of course, we're going to pervert it and change it into something that makes sense to our understanding.
Yeah, it's human nature to want to make things fit, as you said, our narrative. How does this fit into the story that I'm living and the story that I'm telling? The problem with that is not everything fits into our narrative. That is the utter definition of supernatural and extraterrestrial. It doesn't fit into this world. It doesn't fit into the natural. It doesn't fit into our narrative. Our narrative is natural. Our narrative is terrestrial. We try to make things fit into that narrative. And I think I don't consider myself a paranormal investigator. I don't do that. I'm a paranormal researcher. I love researching history, and I love looking at these things, and that was how I approached Mothman. And, from a PR standpoint, which is my career, I represent a couple of individuals in the paranormal field. Bill Bean, someone that you and I both know.
Oh, sure.
The Paravisions Paranormal Society out of Cincinnati, Ohio. I represent them. I help them with their thing. That I do that, and that's my job. I don't throw myself into investigations. I don't throw myself into exorcisms. I don't throw myself into any of that. I try to look at everything as objectively as I possibly can. Not everybody does. We want to make things fit our belief system, whether it's Giorgio Tsoukalos and it's aliens, or whether it's Bill Bean and it's demons, and I'm just using those as examples of extremes. It's not always that. Sometimes we just have to observe, we have to watch, and we have to learn from the experiences that are being granted to us.
Yeah, exactly. And to remove all supposition and just look at it through the scope of its own, its own properties, its own nature, if we can attribute such things. But I think it's fascinating. So I gotta ask you, through this journey, have you come to any conclusions of what it is or isn't, or what do you think?
So when I started the journey in 2003, my hardline approach was that Mothman, in quotes, this winged entity, was demonic or was some kind of negative spiritual manifestation. Over the years, looking at other sightings, looking at all these things, I don't necessarily think that's the case. Do I have an explanation? No, I do not. Still, to this day, I don't have an explanation. It's been 20 years since I started the journey. We released the film in 2009. No, I don't have a hardline stance as to what Mothman was. What I do have is a perspective on what happened to the community. That bridge collapsed on December 15th, 1967. One of the pieces of research that we did when we were doing the documentary, we went to the morgue of the newspaper, and we started pulling news stories. And for 6 months, they were pulling bodies out of the Ohio River. For 6 months, they were doing funerals. For 6 months, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was a national and international source of news. The UK, Hong Kong, Russia, all these places were doing stories about this bridge collapse and all of the people that died. Again, bringing it back to the reality of what happened. Lives were impacted. Lives were changed. Lives were forever altered that day when the bridge collapsed. Now, did that tie into Mothman and the sightings? Absolutely. Did Mothman have anything to do with it? Nobody can say. But that is the one thing, after having spent 6 years in Point Pleasant, interviewing people, writing, researching, doing recreations of different settings and different scenes, that is what I walked away from. And that was, or what I walked away with, rather, was how this event in 13 months, from between November 15th of 1966 and December 15th of 1967, how that event, or those events, impacted the lives in Point Pleasant.
Yeah, the footprint it left was absolutely huge, and it continues, obviously. But the one other thing I wanted to touch on with you, hopefully, if you don't mind, is what do you think? Well, I mean, again, there is precedence for this around the world, but everybody was zeroed in on Point Pleasant, and it's kind of like the Bigfoot phenomena in a lot of ways, because when the Bigfoot term and understanding and awareness kind of hit with the Patterson-Gimlin film and In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy and stuff, it was a Pacific Northwest thing. It was in the Pacific Northwest, and yet come to find out that the reality of it is it's a global phenomena, and they may not be exactly the same around the globe, but they're at least kind of similar, with the Yowies, the Yarans, the Woodwos, and all these other international versions of what we understand to be Bigfoot. And so the kind of the same phenomena, I guess, happened with Point Pleasant, but that's what I'm curious about, because the acceleration of sightings in the Chicago area and the number of people that have come forward, having experienced it near, especially the airport. Do you think that they may have migrated in large part, or is this a population boom, or is this just that? I mean, is it? Well, I mean, there's no way to come to a clear distinction, but do you understand what I'm getting at, or am I just talking in circles?
Both. I think what you're saying, and you're talking in circles. I think one of the interesting things about Point Pleasant, and this is true with the O'Hare Chicago sightings, the Mothman sightings always take place near bodies of water.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Point Pleasant is actually at the convergence of the Kanawha and the Ohio River. They merge literally at the point in Point Pleasant.
Okay.
That's kind of where the name comes from. It was really interesting when we were there. I'm lost wherever I go. If I don't have GPS, I mean, I don't know where I'm going. I mean, I rely on my phone to tell me where to turn, you know.
Sure.
Charlie McCracken was one of the most astute individuals when it comes to directions. We could be anywhere in the world, and he could tell me what direction to go. We'd go to Point Pleasant, and he would totally not know where we were. He wouldn't know north from south, east from west. And it was this weird convergence, you know, when you look at, and there are individuals, you know, ley lines and bodies of water and things like that. When you have this convergence of such natural power, these two bodies of water meeting and then flowing into the ocean, that's one of the things that I think makes Point Pleasant so unique, makes O'Hare and even Minnesota, the water. There's something about the water and these bodies of water that make these entities appear. I don't know what it is. Lon and I have talked about it, and I want to look at it. I want to kind of delve into it. Lon's looking at doing either a documentary or kind of like a TV series and trying to pitch it and things like that. But I think there's some things that have never been explored that need to be explored when it comes to these winged entities.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the rabbit hole gets deeper and deeper on all of these things, but and maybe we're never meant to understand completely, but it's an intriguing phenomena of all of them, simply because we started out and I said, you know, it's kind of a lot of different things, and as we end, it's still a lot of different things, and we just don't know, do we?
No, and I think, you know, honestly, for me, that's actually the beauty of this field. It's kind of this Gnostic quest. It's not the destination, it's the journey. It's the questions. It's the things that we ask along the way. And each question that we ask has its own answer and gives us enlightenment, but not necessarily the great enlightenment. We never understand the full picture, but we get these little pieces along the way. I got interested in supernatural and the paranormal as a kid. You know, my dad was a coal miner, and he worked the evening shift, which meant he went in at 3:00, he got off at midnight. And so when he got home on Friday nights, you know, our thing when I was growing up was to watch Kolchak the Night Stalker. I'm hoping you know this show that I'm referencing.
Oh yeah.
It ran on CBS, you know, originally I think it ran from 72 to 73 or 73 to 74. Ran one season, 13 episodes. And, you know, it was this news reporter that started out doing these mundane, boring stories, but they always ended up with this supernatural, paranormal slant to them. And that just got me interested. And the more I have lived and the more I've experienced, that's kind of how life is. There's the mundane, but there's always this other side. There's always a little bit more. And the only way that you get anything interesting or anything exciting or anything even enlightened is if you go a little bit beyond and ask the question that nobody wants to ask. You go the route nobody else wants to go, and you just you push it a little bit further than anybody else wants to push.
Yeah. Yep, and it's a journey I think we're all on. It's certainly, you just explained my journey too. It's just like, even though it wasn't Colfax or whatever, or what'd you call it? Colfax?
Kolchak, the Night Stalker.
Kolchak, yeah. I was familiar with the show. I don't think I ever watched it though, but same thing. I just couldn't get enough, and I've been on the journey ever since. I've never let go of it because, I've always said I love the fact that the world still has mystery, that there's still discovery to be made, and that's what really pushes me forward. And granted, I don't think I'll ever solve the puzzle on any of this stuff, but I just enjoy the journey too much to put it down,
Well, I think that's, even from a religious standpoint, I think that's part of it. If I understood God and the concept of God, how would that make my life any better?
Sure. Yeah.
Part of it is the wonder. It's questioning.
Right.
And I remember even when I was a pastor, I would have people, especially in the aftermath of a death or something like that, they were like, "Oh, I don't want to question God." Why not? Question him. He made you inquisitive. He gave you curiosity. The key is, if you ask the question, be ready for the answer.
Mm.
Most of us are not actually ready for the answer. We're not prepared for what that revelation actually may be.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I'm here to tell you, I do want to. I'm hoping that at some point we can come to understand some of this stuff, because I think these things do stand to teach us a lot. And through the journey, through the investigation, through the trying to conceptualize what this phenomena is. But I think maybe that's the whole reason for it, is that it keeps us questioning the world around us and looking at the nuances of things that are often overlooked. And maybe that's why these things manifest. Maybe that's why they're here, is because they're meant to teach us, right?
Exactly. I mean, maybe, my thing is I get bored really easily, so I have to have something to constantly intrigue me and make me move forward. And maybe that's human nature. I mean, maybe we need these things like Mothman and Sasquatch and Bigfoot and Loch Ness and Roswell. We need to ask questions. Otherwise, we just become complacent and we just, go through our day as drones, not thinking, not wondering, not having any type of mental stimulation whatsoever.
Yeah, good point. Good point, Travis. I've loved this journey. Every time we talk, I love the opportunity to share ideas with you, because it's such a fascinating journey. And I really appreciate you coming on today. This has been absolutely epic. And you got to come back again, because obviously there's so much more we need to discuss.
I would love to anytime. Just let me know and I will be on the show. It's been a great pleasure, and I'm hoping that everybody has enjoyed the conversation, the dialogue that we've had.
Absolutely. And could you take a minute and just let people know how to stay in touch with you and what you're doing?
Yeah, they can find me. Unfortunately, I'm like on every social media platform whatsoever, even though I don't use them. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and everything else. But if you want to reach me, the easiest way is to look up R. Travis Shortt with 2 T's in short. Totally funny story. Typo on my dad's birth certificate. My grandfather had 1 T in short. My dad with 2. It was just, and so now I'm stuck with it. But yeah, Facebook, R. Travis Shortt, and then if they want to reach out personally, it's travisshortt@gmail.com. It's TravisShortt@gmail.com. And I will respond to anything that comes my way.
Well, thank you so much, brother. It's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, we'll get you back on and we'll continue down these rabbit holes, because this journey's just begun.
Oh, trust me, I will go down any rabbit hole you want to go down, and it has been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for us today. So hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thank you again so much for all your love and support. Remember, if you want to follow the Paranormal Portal, probably the easiest way is to head over to paranormalportal.net, and that's the homepage for the Paranormal Portal, and you'll find links to all of our different social media and sites and information about the shows, including our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/paranormalportal, or just look for Paranormal Portal on Google or whatever search engine, and you'll find links to our social media such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. So we're kind of all over the place, and we're spreading as well as we can. But anyway, thank you so much for the love and support. Y'all take care, and remember, we love y'all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other, help each other out, find the magic in every day, and remember to laugh as much as you can. Until next time.
Well, the only time she really turned with that famous was when I rode across the creek and got down off the horse. She turned to look at me.